Joining us now for our weekly mental health talk is Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Carrie, thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning to you as well. And today, an interesting but a tough topic also, as we're talking about issues that people may be having with their family that may be affecting their mental health, and ultimately some tough decisions that may have to be made regarding those relationships. And so let's begin with at the onset. There's many different ways that people can have issues with members of their family or multiple members of the family, heck, even a large portion of their family. But when those problems do arise, what steps should be taken given that these people are family, you're going to be around them a lot just by the circumstances of life, but also that you can't let necessarily these different problems that are coming up just fester along and ultimately continue to have an impact on your mental health.
Sure, it's so unique to each individual person and each unique family. What one person could find tolerable in terms of behavior, another person may find quite severe and unacceptable. So it's not necessarily one clear rule across the board where the lines draw. One thing I've talked about with my clients is something I call baby boundaries, which just mean incrementally increasing your boundaries and trying there. So sometimes people think, we'd cut off from a toxic partner and be congratulated by our friends for doing the right thing. But when it comes to a toxic family member, everybody's a little bit uncomfortable with just like a solid amputation. And so we suggest trying different things. First limit maybe your time or contact, or be in control of your time and contact. Drive yourself separately, have an exit or escape plan. See if you can control the environment in some way and that's helpful to you. If you try incrementally making, bigger and bigger boundaries to protect yourself and you're still deeply anxious, overwhelmed, or uncomfortable with the experience, or it's becoming more chaotic and out of control or abusive in some way, then ultimately a firm line may have to be drawn and disconnect must have to happen.
Yeah, and it's gonna be interesting too because, like you said, making those breaks or just straight severing the ties with members of your family doesn't just affect you; it affects other members of your family too, and that can add additional stress too onto the situation for yourself and for others as well. So when that does become a situation where you may need to break off your relationship with a member of your family or step away from them or make those incremental changes, what steps should also be taken to involve other members of your family, or at least keep them aware of what you are doing, so that maybe it's not so jarring or affecting them in a negative way too.
Sure. I mean, I think you're going to probably have to do some education with where you're coming from. I mean, certainly some exploration for why those steps seem to be necessary to you, and giving yourself patience and grace, as well as the people in your family. Your siblings may not feel the same way, say for example, about as your parents, or may have different circumstances and different relationships, and they may pressure you to, say for example, get over it or move on or try harder or whatever that may be. And it may just be, taking a deep breath and saying, hey, we have to agree to disagree, or it's clear to me you don't understand my position, but I'm going to be okay with that my decision is okay with me, and that has to be enough. And your decisions to proceed have to be okay with you. And influencing each other isn't appropriate and may even lead to disconnect of this relationship as well.
And that full disconnect isn't always the solution. It isn't always the best solution or the best step to even be taken to deal with some of these different issues. So, where should those discussions, when there is an issue, begin? When should you really be going up to that other person in your family or addressing that issue with that member of your family or members?
Again, I think this is like, right, like again, it probably happens gradually over time. And generally attempts are made to express a position or say, hey, look, I don't like this behavior, or I don't want my children to see you acting this way or treating me this way or treating them that way. And if it persists, then I'm gonna, reduce our time together. And then say, for example, it does persist, and then you say, okay, this thing I said I didn't want to have happen anymore is continuing to happen. So now I'm gonna take my next action. Often I think, especially with family, the reason why disconnect happens is because our family members have been unresponsive to our pleas for request, unwilling, stubborn, defensive, whatever, fill in the blank, abusive, hostile towards our requests, truly don't see things the way we do. At some point, I think when final disconnect happens, you come to the conclusion that this person does not, cannot, and will not understand me. And therefore, a relationship cannot continue.
Are there ways to balance this? Because on the one hand, you don't want to make your family situation necessarily uncomfortable for yourself and for anyone else, but at the same time, being around these people or being around these people behaving in a certain way ha- has an effect on your mental health and can have a significant effect on your mental health too. So, is there a way to balance that out and that you would suggest, or is this the situation where when things do get to a certain breaking point, that severing those ties entirely is the solution?
Sure. I mean, I think you have to evaluate, right? Why is it making you so uncomfortable? What is the degree of discomfort? Is it an inconvenience or irritation, or are you deeply panicked, anxious, sleepless, in planning and preparing for those visits? I mean, if the intensity of your symptoms is severe, long, and frequent, and perhaps even leading to a diagnosable, mental health issue, then I think that's really cause for pause, perhaps speaking to a therapist individually or with your family members to arrive at why. Is it so deeply painful for you? If it's just discomfort, like irritation, inconvenience. I think part of the reason why this topic came up, I'm just speculating here, was some of the cutoffs you read about in Prince Harry's book, and so I'm thinking, like, right, like if it's something too where you've added a new person to the family, say a spouse or partner or child, and you're witnessing discomfort in them. Is it just a lack of familiarity just because it's foreign or different than their own experience? Or is it because it's actually abusive, wrong, hurtful, damaging? Sometimes that takes time and investigation and education, right? That, like, this is common, and can adjustments and compromises be made? I'm not familiar with doing things this way. Is it possible we can find some middle ground or compromise? If compromise is impossible or not even considered, even when someone's struggling, then I think that would also be cause to say, yeah, like, this family is unwilling to make adjustments for a family member. Families should be places of connection, acceptance, warmth. Not all the time. Of course, any family is going to have friction. Um, but if in general it's none of that and always something else, pain, denial, lie, mistrust, harshness, then I think you need to look maybe elsewhere for your close relationships needs to be met.
And it's not always necessarily just a rift between individuals in the family. Sometimes it's just certain behaviors of certain members of the family that have been ignored or been tolerated over the years, and then it changes the entire narrative. It changes the entire consideration of the situation when you bring your children into that, especially at young developmental ages. And so, for parents, how should they be going about balancing that too? Because not only are you impacting your relationship with those family members and with other members of your family by that way, you're also impacting your kids' relationships with their family and the way that they view family relations too.
Absolutely. I think people can experience so much ambivalence, meaning ambivalence is when you have sort of two competing feelings at the same time. Say, for example, you want your children to have the experience other children have of a, loving grandparent relationship, and you want them to have that bond. And you may even see your parents behave different as grandparents than they did as parents to yourself. And that may be exceptionally touching. And then there may be other things that say, gosh, my kids are just kids. They're not fully equipped to be aware of the dynamics that are at play. Maybe kids don't necessarily see everything that's happening kind of behind the smoke and the mirrors. And you want your children to be protected, which it's your job to do that. And you don't want them to have the same experiences perhaps you have. feeling hurt or ignored or rebuked by your own parents. But you also want to have like a healthy grandparent relationship, and that can be a very hard balance for people. They can even experience grief and loss and sadness as a result of sort of accepting that what they want and wish for their kids isn't entirely possible or isn't good.
We're joined by Carrie Krawiec on today's edition of the Megacast. You can find more information and get in contact with Carrie and the other professionals at the Birmingham Maple Clinic by visiting their website at birminghammaple.com or calling them 248 646 6659. 248 646 6659. And, sometimes that clean break is a good thing for you. And sometimes that is also a good thing for the other person or other people involved. And it can be what jars them back to some semblance of reality and causes a change in behavior. So after the fact, after you've made those clean breaks and as time heals some of these wounds in some ways and in others, is there a path that you would suggest to take to maybe rekindle that relationship or repair that relationship or those relationships in the family?
Certainly, I mean, I think family therapy is incredibly useful to help each person be seen and heard and understood. I mean, often the things that lead to cutoff aren't just one person being bad, but just a misunderstanding or a um, just an unequal understanding of a situation, and with education about each other's history, personality, perceptions, at least you can arrive at some empathy, patience, or grace for where a person was coming from, even if you don't agree. And I think family therapy can really be helpful to look at those historical contributors to present day problems. And certainly teaching, modeling healthy communication, avoiding defensiveness, avoiding interrupting, avoiding, name calling, body language, gestures, eye rolls, things that diminish that communication. While you're talking about them in the present, and having, a referee of sorts can help keep conversations on track, because often it's not one hurt in a family that's led to cutoff. It could be many successive ones over time, and trying to untangle them, without the help of a trained observer, you end up just kind of throwing in the whole kitchen sink, and it can be really overwhelming and perhaps even hurt more.
More information and get in contact with the professionals at the Birmingham Maple Clinic, maybe to even address some issues you're having with your family as an individual or as a family, can be found birminghammaple.com. Birminghammaple.com. You can also send them an email, info@birminghammaple.com, for more information and with any questions. Carrie, before we let you go, anything else that we have not considered yet on this topic or I have not discussed that would be important for our audience to keep in mind and consider as they're navigating issues they may or may not be having with their family?
You and I have talked about this a few times. I think we were talking about kind of conflictual holiday meals and things like that. Time and space are your two most important boundaries. So when you're at a family event and you're uncomfortable, find ways to give yourself time and space. If you need to take a walk, excuse yourself to a bedroom, have a code with your partner when it's time to exit. There are small ways you can apply boundaries, but then time and space can also be larger, bigger boundaries. Do you need few days or weeks between each bit of communication, or face-to-face visit. But considering time and space and looking at those two things as two protective walls you have when you're feeling upset with those family interactions.
Carrie, we appreciate you joining us to talk about this topic. It's a tough topic for people to bring up. It's tough for people to understand or to navigate these situations and come to decisions on whether to address these issues with their family and certainly whether or not certain members of the family maybe they shouldn't be associating with anymore. And so we appreciate your insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.